Hello, welcome to Pursuit of Perfect System. My name is Terry Ellis. I'm an audio reviewer and a professional Dirac Live Calibrator, and thanks very much for joining me. About a month ago, I made a video review for the new REL Predator HT1508 subwoofer, which is really quite a big thing for REL to release a dedicated home cinema, one designed for big scale bass and big scale systems, because normally REL is a company renowned and known for creating multi-purpose subwoofers, subwoofers that are designed with music in mind as much as home cinema or movie use in mind. Now, if you go back and watch that video, which I'll link up there for you, you'll see that I was really very impressed with the single HT1508 subwoofer that I was using. I was actually much more impressed with it than I thought I was going to be. I was impressed with its big scale bass output. I was impressed with its control, detail and quality of bass. As a subwoofer, it never seemed to overstay its welcome. Now, I've mentioned that the Predator is big in output. We're having a 15-inch carbon fiber reinforced driver and a 1000-watt amplifier pushing it means you should get pretty big output, and you do. This subwoofer can really rock. Now, after I made that review, REL contacted me and they said, would I be interested in trying a second one? Would I be interested in trying two Predator HT1508 subwoofers just to experience what a dual setup of them would be like? And naturally, I ripped their arm off and I've been using two in my system now for a period of time. It would be a bit silly of me to just come on here and repeat really what I said in the last review video, because if you add a second subwoofer to a system that you already like, there's no chance at all that you're not going to like the second one or like a pair of them any less. You're only ever going to like a pair of them more. So instead of doing that, I thought I would come on here and talk to you about the less obvious benefits of having a dual subwoofer setup, and then talk to you a bit about what I was able to achieve by having the dual Predator HT1508 subwoofers in my review system. If you do a quick Google search of single versus dual subwoofer setups, you'll see a million responses where people have advised you to always use a dual subwoofer setup, and for good reason, such as improved output, improved and more even bass response, and a few others. And to make those responses and those people totally right, you'll see no argument from me. But it's not always that clear cut and that simple. Just having a dual subwoofer setup does not guarantee you're going to get bass and audio nirvana. It's actually far from it. A single subwoofer set up properly and set up well will easily and always outperform a dual subwoofer setup that's set up poorly or not set up well at all. And when I go out and do Dirac Live calibrations for customers, it's the bass that I spend the most time on, working hard to get the bass properly integrated at the right rate and levels. And it doesn't matter whether it's a single subwoofer setup or a dual subwoofer setup or more, I'm always able to make a huge improvement to the bass of the system just by the quality of the setup that I do with Dirac Live. In my review system at the moment with the dual REL Predator subwoofers, I would say I've got about a perfect bass integration between the two subwoofers and my main speakers, which are KEF Reference and KEF LS50. Now, with just the one or the single REL Predator subwoofer, I would not have said that. And here's why. It's pretty self-explanatory, but when you only have one subwoofer and you want big scale and big output bass, you naturally have to push that subwoofer pretty hard, and in some regards, very hard. And what will happen is, as part of the setup, you'll find there needs to be a compromise. You'll probably set the subwoofer up for maximum impact and maximum tactile and kind of that bass that you can feel. But what you'll find is, across a variety of different content, the subwoofer will either become more localized or audible or directional in its bass. And it's just one of those things, when there is one subwoofer and you try and push it hard, at some point with some content, you'll definitely be able to hear where the bass is coming from. So you can work around that by lowering the bass or reducing the volume from the subwoofer. And this doesn't matter whether you're crossing over at 80 Hertz or below, the result will still be the same. So you'll find a point where you probably want more bass and more tactile, more impact from the subwoofer, but it's at that point where if I turn it up anymore, it's going to be directional. So you've got two choices. You either turn the subwoofer down, or you live with the fact that you can hear it and you can hear where the bass is coming from. Running dual subwoofers naturally makes your ear less sensitive to where the bass is coming from. And the fact you have more drivers moving more air means you have to drive those subwoofers less hard to create the same amount of bass output and for it to have the same amount of bass impact. As I mentioned, this is pretty self-explanatory and pretty obvious stuff, but it does make a really big difference to the bass quality that you're able to achieve from a home cinema system. And this is especially true in those deeper notes, around your 30 hertz and below. This is normally where dual subwoofers really help. Now this can be a moot point if you're sitting in a very hot part of the room and you're getting a lot of bass boost from the room, but it's really quite an interesting one, because even when that is the situation, the quality of how the bass starts still seems to have quite a big impact on the quality of the bass that you end up hearing. That's providing you've got a good, or at least a modicum of good quality bass management, which means you're actually hearing more notes than you are just an oversaturated or boomy type one note bass. Having lived with a single REL HT1508 subwoofer for a period of time and spending some good time listening to it, when I added the second REL Predator subwoofer to the system, I made a few changes. I actually turned down the volume on the amplifier ever so slightly. I turned it down to about 11 o'clock. Now that is not something I normally do as part of a setup of a subwoofer, because normally subwoofers, especially the smaller ones, seem to benefit from having the amplifier turned up. But in the instances of the REL Predator, maybe it's because it's a 15-inch driver and it's naturally more sensitive. Maybe it's just the way the amplifier works and its gain structure. I found about 11 o'clock as a volume setting worked really well in my room with how I was about to set them up. So after installing the second REL subwoofer, I naturally ran a new set of Dirac Live measurements, and I used pretty much the identical target curve for the dual Predator subwoofers as I used for the single Predator subwoofer. And the only reason I changed the target curve is because I realized I could slightly improve it. I didn't change it for the fact that I was using two subwoofers over one. Now doing this as part of a really good setup with the tweaks that I made to the target curve resulted in an absolutely fantastic sounding system with really high quality bass. The dual REL Predator subwoofers will give me a really detailed, really controlled and really nuanced bass, but with really big impact, scale and output. But with the kicker, that at no point did I feel underwhelmed with the bass, and I think more importantly, did I feel overwhelmed by the bass. And by overwhelmed, I mean at no point did I feel that these subwoofers were losing control or losing it and give me that horrible, nasty, kind of rumbly bass, the stuff that makes the room rattle and stuff, that horrible rubbish bass. That is not ever good bass. Good bass is tight, controlled, detailed, and it's never ever nasty and rumbly. And I naturally found this to be very impressive, because you have to factor in these are not cheap subwoofers priced at £1,599 each, but they're far from expensive for the bass quality and the bass quantity that they can deliver. With the two REL Predator subwoofers in my system, I would say I've been getting a reference level bass performance. And by that, I just mean I'm getting the right amount and the right quality of bass to be hearing the movie's sound design pretty close or damn close to how it would have been created. And there is really a lot of insight into the bass production and the movie sound production as a whole, and the bass has been very hard to fault and very hard to criticize. And I wished I could sit you all down in the main listening seat in my review room so you could all hear this for yourself. I am going to do my best to do some recordings of the system to try and give you some idea of what I'm talking about. Am I getting perfect bass? Sadly, no. But am I getting good enough bass for it to be end game bass? Well, I'd say it's pretty damn close. The movies that I've been using to test the REL Predator subwoofers, well, I started off with Avengers, Endgame and John Wick 3. And I deliberately waited till I had both of the REL HT1508 subwoofers in the system to watch these movies, and you can imagine how painful that was. I would say both of these movies have good enough soundtracks to make them demo material for when you invite your friends over and you want to show off your systems. I was particularly impressed with the John Wick 3 soundtrack because that seemed like a far more refined soundtrack compared to the previous two movies. And the bit towards the end where there's a massive shootout, I'm sure there's no spoilers there. There's a whole barrage of handgun and machine gun fire. The bass from that scene was really fast and really punchy and really quick. But then when they stepped over to using the shotguns, the change in the tone was really clear and really obvious, as it should be. And the shotguns had real thud and real kick to them from the REL Predator subwoofers, which was really impressive and really good fun. Now, I must admit, after watching John Wick 3, the greedy audiophile in me came out and started to question whether those shotguns should be kicking more or not. So I went back to the drawing board and did some more testing. I inserted the Blade Runner 2049 Ultra HD Blu-ray because that has got some really crazy, intense bass, and it is a real torture test for any subwoofer or subwoofers. Right at the beginning of the film, there is some really unusual and I think quite nasty sounding bass, which often makes a subwoofer make some funny noises, and the REL's HD 1508 subwoofers did make those same funny noises, but I don't really hold it against them because I've got a funny feeling that's just part of that particular soundtrack. As the film moves on, there's some more crazy and intense, really hot bass, and the dual 1508s did a fantastic job of presenting that soundtrack to me with that scowl, and really unraveled and dissected the soundtrack to make me realise that the bass isn't that wonderful in that movie, probably about an 8 out of 10. Watching another recent Ultra HD Blu-ray, Alita Battle Angel, again I was really impressed with the scale and impact of the bass from this particular movie, and I was really impressed with how the dual HD 1508s dissected the bass in this film, and again I'll only give that about an 8 out of 10 for bass quality. Previously I would have said that the bass in this movie was better. Now at this point the subwoofers have been on for a while and they've started to really warm up, and I think that is something to bear in mind. I found they take at least a half an hour just to get going, warm up and start to deliver just what they're capable of. And it's at this point I had a little rummage and I pulled out a bit of an old classic and a bit of an old favourite test disc of mine, the Ultra HD of Pacific Rim, the original one, not the crappy sequel. My memory of the soundtrack of this Ultra HD is one of a very big and epic scale one, but one that's not that clear and well defined. Well, at least I used to think so. What came next I was definitely not expecting and not prepared for, and it really shocked me. I could talk to you about the overall sound mix and what all the improvements that I've made recently to my home cinema review system, all the extra speakers for Dolby Atmos and the changes here and the changes there, and what they've done to the overall presentation of the system. But really we want to talk about the bass, because oh my god, this is the most refined but brutal bass I've ever experienced from home orientated subwoofers to date. Yes, it was a relentless barrage of bass insanity, but in a controlled and precise and detailed way. I mean a physical, controlled and tactile bass experience. It's designed to bring this film to life and make you feel like you're actually inside those Jaeger robots fighting with massive great big monsters. And I feel like my review system with the two REL HD 1508 subwoofers is in some way doing justice now to the fantastic sound production work that went into creating this Ultra HD Blu-ray, really to the point where my little ears felt like I could only just about handle it. But that really made for an incredible experience. And this is definitely a result of the whole system and the way the whole system has unraveled that sound mix. But the two REL subwoofers were a huge part of that unraveling, and they created a level of intensity and brutality, but again, never overstaying their welcome, so that you can still hear all the other details of the sound mix. And again, that's really damn impressive. The REL Predator subwoofers are not perfect, and there'll be things here and there that remind you of that fact. But they do so much right, and they do so much so well that you can pretty much overlook those few imperfections. And having two REL Predator subwoofers in my system has really allowed me to push the envelope of the performance of that system purely because of what they are capable of. They are capable of full-on, hardcore, impressive movie bass, but with finesse, much more finesse than you would ever expect. So what could come next? 4 of them? That would be absolutely insane. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it, make sure to hit the thumbs up button and support the channel by subscribing and hitting the notification bell. Make sure to go and visit our website for more news, articles, reviews and more. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll be seeing you all soon. Take care.